Will the Trump negotiated ceasefire in Gaza hold as more fire is exchanged over the weekend and as Hamas moves to violently purge potential rivals? Plus, the U.S. and Australia sign a deal on rare earth minerals after China uses its stranglehold on their production to threaten the West.
From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Welcome, I'm Kyle Peterson with the Wall Street Journal. We're joined today by my colleagues on the editorial page, Elliot Kaufman and Alicia Finley. How fragile is that peace in Gaza negotiated by President Trump after, over the weekend, 2 Israeli Defense Forces soldiers were killed? Israeli military sources saying this was the result of terror operatives in Rafah. Israel then responding over the weekend with airstrikes. Let's listen to a clip of Donald Trump responding to this on Monday at the White House.
We made a deal with Hamas that they're going to be very good. They're going to behave. They're going to be nice. And if they're not, we're going to go and we're going to eradicate them if we have to. They'll be eradicated. And they know that. So they went in. They went in. And I don't believe it was the leadership. But they had some rebellion in there among themselves. And they killed some people, a lot of people. But this is a violent group. You probably noticed over the last 100 years, this is a very violent group of people. And they got very rambunctious and they did things that they shouldn't be doing. And if they keep doing it, then we're going to go in and straighten it out. And it'll happen very quickly and pretty violently.
Elliot, what's your sense of how the ceasefire is holding given this exchange of fire over the weekend?
Well, I think what President Trump was trying to do right there is hold it. And the way to do that is contradictory. It involves threats, as you heard, but it also involves excuses. Maybe it wasn't the leadership. Maybe they didn't know. Maybe it was just rogue elements doing this. I mean, Hamas in the past used to claim that when rockets were fired, it was because lightning struck and just hit the rocket and made it explode. They're full of excuses like this when they want to be. And if you want the ceasefire to hold, it seems like you might have to make excuses for them as well. And so the question is, how long can that last? In a sense, it's up to Hamas. If this was a one-off breaking that ceasefire, well, then it seems like President Trump, through this, through these contradictions, was able to bring that round of fighting to a relatively quick end. But if Hamas keeps doing that, I think President Trump will have a far harder time.
And the deal does seem to, I think, have changed the dynamic on the ground somewhat in that all of the living hostages, the Israeli hostages, were released. I mean, what's your sense of how much that changes the sense of freedom of action that the Israeli forces have in responding to continued violence?
I think it changes everything because if, as had been discussed with previous potential deals, only half of the living hostages had been released at the outset, and then half would be released at the very end, what would happen when Hamas violated the deal? Well, Israel would feel huge pressure not to jeopardize the deal. Because if you do, you could lose out on half of those living hostages. And so with those out and only slain hostages, dead bodies remaining in Gaza, Israel has a far freer hand, is far more open to doing what it did on Sunday. Dozens of airstrikes, killing Hamas commanders, hitting an important tunnel, all kinds of things like that, and looking at even stronger action that it has not taken, but that President Trump is still threatening.
But bigger questions too, even beyond the holding of the ceasefire, but the next steps in the 20-point deal that Trump laid out. I mean, one of them was disarming of Hamas. It seems like the terror group has made pretty clear by now that it does not intend to be disarmed, including purging some of its rivals. Talk about what it's been up to there. I mean, this video that surfaced of executions in a public square. That does not suggest that Hamas wants to take those next steps of this 20-point plan.
Yeah, or that it wants to give up control over Gaza when it's doing all it can to solidify control right now. I mean, what you're talking about is phase 2 of the plan, moving into disarmament, demilitarization, and even de-radicalization. But phase 1 isn't yet over, right? I mean, Hamas has yet to release all of the dead hostages, all of the slain hostages, as it promised. It released, I think, 1 more on Monday, 2 more now on Tuesday. It's dribbling them out, claiming it can't find them. And then when there's pressure, all of a sudden it finds them, but only 1 or 2. And there will still be 13 remaining after these. And so it's playing for time here before we even get to demilitarization, disarmament, as its senior officials keep saying they don't want to do, or they don't want to do it meaningfully, or they'll maybe do it for a short period of time, but not afterward. That wasn't what the deal contemplated. And what we're finding is that Hamas doesn't view itself as held to these terms. The good news is that this was anticipated. We know that Hamas breaks ceasefires, that it doesn't want peace with Israel. And so if there's a Trump peace plan, of course, it's going to work against that. It'll work to subvert that. And that's why it mattered so much to get all the hostages out first, so that Israel and the US have the leverage they need to do something about it.
But you interpret its claims that it can't locate the rest of these slain hostages as an attempt by Hamas to lengthen this first phase and make sure that it can reassert and retain control of whatever pieces of Gaza it's still in control of.
Yes, I do, because these dead bodies were some of its most important bargaining chip, some of its most important assets. It had every reason, every incentive to know exactly where they are. There are some arguments that, well, bombs have fallen, things have moved. It could be difficult to get there, even if you know where the bodies are. Well, an international team has now entered Gaza to help with exactly that. And so really, Hamas should be out of excuses on this front. And Israeli intelligence has been that maybe there are a few of the slain hostages where Hamas no longer knows or would have to search for, but most of them it knows or should know.
What about another piece of this 20-point plan that President Trump put out? This was the stabilization force supposed to be contributed by Arab and Muslim countries. President Trump leaning on that again on Tuesday morning. Here is part of his Truth Social post. Numerous of our now great allies in the Middle East and areas surrounding the Middle East have explicitly and strongly, with great enthusiasm, informed me that they would welcome the opportunity at my request to go into Gaza with a heavy force and straighten out Hamas if Hamas continues to act badly in violation of their agreement with us. He went on to say this: there's still hope that Hamas will do what is right. If they do not, an end to Hamas will be fast, furious, and brutal. Is that, do you buy that there's this Arab stabilization force that President Trump said is ready and would welcome the opportunity to go into Gaza in heavy force?
In heavy force, no, I don't buy that. The only nation that is willing to fight Hamas in Gaza is Israel. And it sort of makes sense. I mean, why would the United Arab Emirates risk its own troops? Or why would Jordan risk its own troops to fight to keep Israel safe? Right? I mean, so I don't think that is expected of them. And if it is expected of them, it won't work. And in fact, what we're seeing now is that this stabilization force is badly needed as soon as it possibly can to stop Hamas from establishing new facts, or rather old facts, on the ground in Gaza. But it's taking time, and maybe they're not quite ready. And if it's going to involve fighting Hamas, maybe that's not exactly what they signed up for. They want to be peacekeepers. Peacemakers is a very different task. And I think that in the end, it will probably require more Israeli freedom of action, even in these areas of Gaza run by a stabilization force, than just about any Arab or Muslim nation would be happy with.
Let me ask you also about Israel's side of the deal. It agreed to release some Palestinian prisoners that it held. Has it upheld that end of the bargain? And who are those prisoners? What was their reception?
Yes, it has upheld that. Other than the ones that it is waiting for the slain hostages to be released first. So you have two different categories of prisoners. You have 250 of them who were convicted and serving life sentences. Israel only has just over 300 of those. So most of them were freed. These were just about the worst terrorists in Israeli prisons. And so you have major Hamas commanders, Islamic Jihad commanders, people who orchestrated multiple suicide bombings, major terrorist attacks in Israel, people with blood on their hands. And it has not been easy for Israelis to see them being welcomed back, their return being celebrated. And not only that, but seeing that they've been paid all of this while monthly salaries by the Palestinian Authority, which is supposed to be the more moderate Palestinian arm running the West Bank, but has this pay for slay program where it subsidizes terrorism. And so you have terrorists who emerge from Israeli prison as millionaires, at least in shekels. And you have a couple terrorists who have killed American citizens and have been paid, a few $100,000 US in their time for their deeds. And so that has been very difficult. There is also a much larger group of Gazans who have been arrested since the start of this war, have not yet been convicted, have not yet been tried, but were being held and were also released as a part of this.
Let's turn now to this deal announced by President Trump on Monday with Australia's Prime Minister Anthony Albanese involving rare earth minerals. Earlier this month, China said that it was going to put export controls on any companies, foreign companies, exporting rare earth minerals, processed, made, mined in China. And in response to that, President Trump has now cut this deal with the Australians. Listen to this.
And we've had a very good relationship. We've been working on that for quite a while. In about a year from now, we'll have so much critical mineral and rare earths that you won't know what to do with them. They'll be worth about $2. But in the meantime, we're working with Australia and other countries. They're working with us too, but other countries also on that.
Alicia, let's start with what this Chinese policy, this Chinese threat is. My understanding, most rare earth minerals are sourced from China in one way or another, whether they're mined there or not, they may be processed there and required for all sorts of high-tech goods. And so what would be the impact? What's the expected effect of China trying to extend its export controls basically throughout the global economy?
Right. So rare earth minerals are essential to a wide array of goods, namely electronics, chips, Tomahawk missiles, a lot of defense equipment, and they're included in really trace minute small amounts. And they are usually mined as part of broader mining operations. And China really has a stranglehold on these rare earth minerals, and it has developed that over the last 30 or so years, and it's been intentional. You can go back, and then there's a quote by one of the Chinese leaders, that, well, OPEC has oil, we will have rare earth minerals. minerals, and it intended to use these rare earth minerals, much like the Arab countries did oil during the Arab embargo. And that's kind of what they're doing here. Um, China controls about 70% of rare earth minerals, and 90% of the refining. And the reason why there's kind of a discrepancy there is because actually Chinese companies actually own and run mines in other places of the world, and then that is shipped back to China to refine. And some of other mining companies, even Western companies, get or have their rare earths refined and then created into what are known as magnets in China. It's cheap because of the economies of scale. China has really also developed the technology that other countries haven't, or rather perfected that technology. And it also has lower environmental standards, and mining and refining process, especially the refining process, can be or can entail a lot of environmental hazards. And China doesn't really have a national environmental policy act or other kind of environmental rules that requires companies to abide by, unlike in the US or in any other Western countries. So the upshot of all of this is that China is now essentially trying to do what it would amount to even more, or would amount to a global embargo on these rare earth minerals. It wants to require any company, as you point out, whose products contain 0.1% or less, as measured as their total value of Chinese rare earth minerals, both mined or processed in China, to receive its permission to export goods. Now, this can snarl all kinds of companies. I mentioned electronics, autos. It could hurt U.S. defense manufacturers, and not just in the U.S., again, globally. And so this really is an attack, I think, as Scott Bessent said, on global supply chains and the industrial base.
What's your read of the new agreement between the U.S. and Australia on rare earths? That's what was announced on Monday. What are the two countries agreeing to, and how much can that potentially help alleviate this Chinese leverage over rare earths?
So it's going to be really hard to do anything or accomplish anything in the short term. There's a lot of exploration in Australia, 4 times more investment in terms of rare earth exploration in Australia than there is in other countries. So there's a lot of investment going into that, but even developing a mine can take at least 10 years, roughly on average 15. In the US, it's actually 30. So that's going to take quite a lot of time. Australia says it's going to, work on developing more refining capacity in Malaysia. Malaysia, if you recall, is actually also one of the biggest alternative suppliers to China right now. By the way, it was also part of the TPP Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement that Trump pulled out of, and nixed, that could have given the U.S. a little more leverage or way to push back against China. So the part of this agreement with the Australia and U.S. is really about a coordination, or the beginning of a coordination of kind of a global effort of allies to counter China's global stranglehold. And that includes combating efforts by China to buy up more mines in other countries, perhaps by making their own bids, and kind of enticing other countries, much like they're trying to do, by the way, with ports, and enticing other countries to maybe reject Chinese bids for control of these mines. Another part of this effort would be to set some kind of price floor. And why this is important is what China has done essentially over the last 30 years is, besides essentially just subsidizing its mining industry very heavily, which has pushed down prices and made it very difficult for other countries with especially those with higher environmental standards, to profit from making and selling rare earths. So there would be some kind of coordination on a global level to, excluding China, obviously, to set some kind of price floor for trading rare earths so these companies can actually be profitable.
Well, on the point about short term versus long term, there are also efforts to create, expand a U.S. domestic rare earth industry. The Defense Department having a partnership now with a company called MP Materials. But Alicia, that to me, I would also put in the long term bucket, given how long it takes to build anything in the United States to get through that environmental permitting review process that you mentioned. In the short term, interesting this effort by the Trump administration to marshal friendly trading allies to counter this Chinese move. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent saying this recently. We're going to have a fulsome group response to this because bureaucrats in China cannot manage the supply chain or the manufacturing process for the rest of the world. He went on to say, we're going to be speaking with our European allies, with Australia, with Canada, with India, and the Asian democracies, unquote. And I mean, I think that that's a good approach for the United States to take. I think it's a good approach even beyond rare earths in response to Chinese mercantilism, trading abuses, intellectual property theft, and so forth. The question in my mind is, why not have done that from the beginning? I mean, it seems like maybe the Trump administration has burned some capital with those allies and friendly countries with its willy-nilly trade wars and its tariffs that change day by day, reciprocal tariffs. They're on, they're off, they're announced, they're negotiated. It seems like that's a lot of effort that could have been better spent marshaling those countries then to deal with this problem of China as the behemoth in the the Asian trade.
Well, I think that's right. It's hard to fight a trade war with China when you're fighting it with 50, 60 other countries. And you really need these other countries, the U.S. allies, their assistance to push back against China. They may have some other cards that they could play against China that we don't in terms of their industry. India is the biggest alternative producer of generic pharmaceuticals and active pharmaceutical ingredients, and China actually somewhat depends on India as a buyer. So that's one example, but there could be others. You could have a more of a global boycott of Chinese goods exports that would really put pressure on the Chinese economy, which has already been suffering from some deflation, and hence why they've just been trying to export a lot of their excess capacity or excess production in some goods like steel and such. And so the goal should be, I think, in the administration, Scott Bessent, the wiser heads in the administration realize that the goal should be to create a coordinated kind of multilateral effort to contain China and to increase pressure, because they're not gaining an advantage in rare earth minerals is going to happen anytime soon. I mean, it's really going to take, barring some kind of technological breakthrough, which is possible, by the way, like we had with shale hydraulic fracturing, barring some kind of breakthrough like that, this isn't going to be overnight. It's going to be kind of a grinding kind of trade war with China, and that you're going to need to conscript all of our allies to fight.
But a multilateral group of friendly trading nations getting together to counter China, it sounds an awful lot like the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the much reviled by the Trump crowd TPP deal. And I mean, that approach, I think, makes sense, but it is an approach that President Trump, I think, has rejected in favor of these kinds of bilateral one-by-one deals. And that's the difficult thing, I think, is he wants to be the negotiator in all these cases, but sometimes it seems that entails hitting you with tariffs one day and then calling up the next day and saying, by the way, maybe you could help us with this rare earth business.
Well, I think that's right. And Australia, we have a trade surplus with Australia, so it kind of makes it easy. But we don't with Japan and South Korea, which the president really has a bugaboo about, because we do import a lot of industrial goods, washing machines, and that kind of stuff, or refrigerators, the things that Trump believes should be made in the U.S., but really we don't have a comparative advantage. And so that's been kind of autos, by the way, is another example. That's really been a sticking point for the for the president why he doesn't really want to engage in these multilateral lateral deals, where he thinks that these other countries that are lower cost producers will end up ripping us off. But really, we need those countries in that neighborhood to help again counter China, because they're also could be alternative suppliers like Vietnam for Malaysia. We were talking about earlier, alternative suppliers for a lot of goods.
Thank you, Alicia and Elliot. Thank you all for listening. You can email us at pwpodcast@wsj.com. If you like the show, please hit that subscribe button, and we'll be back tomorrow with another edition of Potomac Watch.